Okay, so Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It's already off to a good start. Here we go. Oh, actually, I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because a lot of us are, worried or anxious or have to spend a lot of time at home, and so I'd like to give a little time where you can take your mind off things and enjoy. Somebody wrote something. I see your bedroom. Yeah, Mark's in the other room. He can hear my voice. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. It's a bit too loud. It's distracting me. There we go. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful, as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursley-ish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think that what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they'd never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. Okay, they're setting up not exactly the villains, but I guess the douchebags. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away, happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. Okay, so the kid's a bit younger than that. Okay. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. Yeah. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or sign. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw in young people. Oh, he's a curmudgeon. Let me see here. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged. To see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. No sign of Harry yet, hey? Okay. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. Harry is still a baby, of course, still no sign of him. Okay, very true. He's probably not walking the streets. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. He's just throwing shade all over the place. He just does not care for anything about drills. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. Potters, that's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. First attempt at voices. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers, as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her. If he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare, Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day. The old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. How's that? Is that an important character? I need to read from the side. Read the comments for pronunciation. Oh, I can't read and read at the same time. You'll have to give me that feat, or I'll go through it later on. And here. Is it Mr. Dursley? Am I saying Mr. Dursley right? I guess so. All right. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. Shoo, said Mr. Dursley loudly. Mr. Dursley? Let's just keep posting. Daresley. It's Daresley. Is it Daresley? Dursley. Daresley. I'm getting mixed feedback, so I'm going to go with D-E-R-Z-L-E-E. Daresley. All right, Daresley it is. That's a weird pronunciation for the way it's written. Okay. Shoo, said Mr. Daresley loudly. Eh? Dare. Mark, if you're in the other room, you can come and give me the right pronunciation. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's Hey, Mark! What's the pronunciation?
It's Dursley.
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 Mr. Dursley.
Mr. Dursley.
All right, that's it. That's okay. It's just a buddy. Dursley. Okay, there we go. Mrs. Dursley had a nice, normal day. I'm learning. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word. Shan't. Is that a kid's voice? Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself... Oh, that was all news report. I didn't do that. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Leviosa, oh, I'm not even there yet. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper about the Potters. Mr. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny-looking people in town today. So? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her lot. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, their son, he'd been about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. How are those voices for, yeah, good voices? All right, cool. I just need everybody has their own imagination of these horrible people. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. This cat's a stalker. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. What a great name, Petunia. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when the two owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak which swept the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. High-heeled, buckled boots. Alliteration. Such a great writing tool. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. Ooh, this guy's a brawler. Oh, Dumbledore! Dumbledore because nose broken twice? He's a brawler. Okay, this man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus, is that right? Okay. Let me know. Let me know if Albus is right. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, I should have known. I should have known. I'll figure it out. He had found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer, until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of the window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment it spoke to him. Fancy... Meow. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. Oh, wait, no, that's not the cat speaking. It's Dumbledore speaking. All right. But after a moment he spoke to it. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Yeah, maybe I do need glasses. Maybe I'll have to pick up some glasses. I'll grab some glasses for next time if I can find any. He turned to smile at Tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Oh! Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. How did you know it was me? She asked. My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. Does that sound about right for Hall? Oh, McGonagall. McGonagall. Okay. I'll leave this for the feedback session. Tell me if these voices sound right. All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. Professor McGonagall. Does that sound right? McGonagall. Yeah. McGonagall. There we go. McGonagall. She's Scottish. All right, I'll try a bit of Scottish in there. Okay. Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating all right. I can't even think of Scottish accent. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. Oh gosh, I'm gonna practice this later. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. Even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news. She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. I heard it. Flock of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He had never much sense. Oh, hey, Kenton's mom is on the chat. Nice. Okay, here we go. Back to Dumbledore. You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out in the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumours. She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on. A fine thing it would be if, on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore? It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon? A what? A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. I appreciate that McGonagall is now a sexy, sassy woman. She's a bit more rough around the edges, John. Okay. I'll give her a bit more roughness. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for sherbet lemons. As I say, even if you know who has gone, like that kind of rough around the edges. The ol is actually O, sound like old. McGonagall. Ah, McGonagall. I'm highly entertained, but also completely lost. I'm going to reread this. Yeah, you should. Okay. Who am I reading now? There we go. Dumbledore. My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name. Voldemort. Professor oh gosh, this name. McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 sherbet lemons, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing if you keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall. I gotta get her right. Oh, man. Sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only you-know... Oh, all right. Voldemort was frightened of. Oh, you flatter me, said Voldemort calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Only because you're, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. He's a bit too posh, I'm finding, right? A bit too posh. She's more proper. I got she's more proper. She's more rough around the edges. She's not Cockney. I'll get there. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, The owls are nothing to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he's disappeared, about what finally stopped him. It seemed that Professor McGonagall, I hope I'm saying that right. Proper? Yeah, she's more proper. Pursed-lipped, sassy. Okay, I'm going to get that in. It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter that they're... Ted! Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped.
Lily and James, I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus.
That's Dumbledore, right? Yeah. Dumbledore voice is on point. Okay, that goes. Very stern, like a disciplinarian at school. Okay, that helps. Yeah, okay. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on.
That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone.
Dumbledore nodded glumly.
It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding, of all the things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive?
We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know.
Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief. Ooh, lace handkerchief. And dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said,
Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you he'd be here. I'd be here, by the way.
Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places?
I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now.
You can't mean the people who live here,
cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4.
Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find two people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here.
It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter.
A letter?
Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall.
Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name.
Oh, a little bit of fourth wall breaking there? Oh,
exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top.
Did I? I got it right? Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm happy. What was it? Looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. Who am I reading? Him?
Yeah. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see him?
Oh, wait, no, this is McGonagall. No, this is... Sorry.
Okay, can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it?
Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said,
Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore?
She eyed his cloak suddenly as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it.
Hagrid's bringing him.
You think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this?
I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore.
I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that?
A low rumbling sound. Oh, man, stuff is starting. Good, I got her right. Okay. A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky, and a huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. Oh, okay, there's somebody on top of this motorbike. Okay. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. Holy. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild, Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like baby dolphins. These are great descriptions. Nice, Jordan. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved.
At last. And where did you get that motorbike?
Okay, so a giant voice.
Borrowed it. No. Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir,
said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorbike as he spoke.
Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir.
No problems were there?
No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we was flying over Bristol.
How's that? It was way better than National Tonight. Okay. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. Oh, is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall.
Yes,
said Dumbledore.
You'll have that scar forever.
Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore?
Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I've one myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give 'em here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with.
Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursleys' house.
Could I say goodbye to Miss... Could I say goodbye to him, sir?
Asked Hagrid. He bent his great, shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Oh, man. Shh, hissed Professor McGonagall.
You'll wake the muggles.
Sorry,
sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying it in his face.
But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor little Harry off to live with muggles.
Yes, it's all very sad, but get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found.
Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arms as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out.
Well,
said Dumbledore finally,
that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations. Yeah,
said Hagrid in a very muffled voice.
I'll be taking Sirius's bike back. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir.
Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night.
I shall see you soon,
I expect,
Professor McGonagall,
said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4.
Good luck, Harry,
he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would ever expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." That's chapter 1. Can you do the bike noise? Yes, more sound effects. Okay, people are wanting sound effects. Learn how to pronounce Professor oh boy, I will look at Professor McGonagall or whatever it is, and Dursley for sure. All right, where are we at time-wise? Oh, we got a little bit more time. I'd like to read a bit more. I'm going to read more. Just a little review. So the people in cloaks running around town, I guess they were scouting out the area for Dumbledore, for McGonagall, however you say her name. It's pretty good writing. I like it till now. Let's see where it goes. The boy who lived, he's already a legend in his own right. He's already got it all set up for him. Okay, chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. I'm going to do about 20 more minutes. All right? And then we'll continue tomorrow. Nearly 10 years. Whoa! Time jump. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Okay, one sec. More commentary, please. Okay, I'll give you more commentary at some point. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different color bobble hats. What? 10 years ago, there had been a lot of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bobby hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer... Oh. Okay, so the baby, he looked like a... Okay, I get it now. I get it. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photograph showed a large blonde boy riding his first bicycle on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Okay, so my guess is they're using the same kind of prototype in a lot of these children novels of there being some kind of brat and who's related to the main protagonist and just bugging the hell out of him and being a meanie so that you can relate to the main guy. Well, Harry Potter, yeah. Yet Harry Potter was still there, still in the cot, asleep on the front porch. No. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice which made the first noise of the day. Up! Get up! Now! Harry woke with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. Up! She screeched. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the cooker. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. Oh, he had a funny feeling he'd had the same dream before. Well, you have, Harry. His aunt was back outside the door. Are you up yet? She demanded. Nearly, said Harry. Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Daddy's birthday. Daddy! On Daddy's birthday! Harry groaned. What did you say? His aunt snapped through the door. Nothing. How old is he right now? Oh, 10 years old. Okay. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed and after pulling a spider off one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. They're basically making his life the worst. Sleep on the front porch, yeah. Yeah, his life is the worst right now. Okay, when he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had got the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. That's some great exercise. Dudley's favorite punch bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Oh, that's a funny image. Just punching the crap out of Harry every day and Harry running away. Little Dudley trying to catch up. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. No, it definitely has something to do with a cupboard. Yeah, they're probably not feeding him either, malnourishing him. Okay. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. Oh my gosh, Dudley! What a little douchebag. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he got it. "In the car crash when your parents died," she had said, "and don't ask questions." Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. I like the descriptions. Descriptions are really great in here, and she has fun with the descriptions too. Pig in a wig, a lot of fun things to read and say. It's all so fun. Harry put the plates of egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Oh, who's this now? Oh, that's the mom. Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Marge's present, see? It's here under this big one from Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Popkin? 2 more presents? Is that all right?" Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, "So I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. Oh, Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right, then." Uncle Vernon chuckled. "Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Atta boy, Dudley." He rolled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a cine camera, a remote-control airplane, 60 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch. This kid is rich. Well, the parents are rich, but this kid is spoiled. He needs a good beating. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone looking both angry and worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her hair in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at photographs of all the cats he'd ever owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry for Mrs. Figg. He ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg. But it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mrs. Paw, and Tufty again. "We could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested.
Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy.
The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug.
What about what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne.
On holiday in Mallorca,
Snapped Aunt Petunia.
You can't just... You could just leave me here.
Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and even have a go on Dudley's computer. Little water break. That went for a while. I feel supported. Just a pick and a wig. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves. And I'm bummed I can't read these comments when I'm reading it. Okay. Where are we? Aunt Petunia looked as though she just swallowed a lemon.
And come back and find the house in ruins, she snarled.
I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. You know, actually, I think I remember from the first movie. I barely remember anything, but I wonder, he was raised by the Dursleys, so I don't know, are they Cockney? Because he would have a Cockney accent too, because they were raising him. Anyway, let me know what you think. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia slowly, and leave him in the car.
That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone.
Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried. But he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted.
Oh, Dinky Duddy Dums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day,
she cried, flinging her arms around him.
I don't want him to come,
Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs.
He always spoils everything.
He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gape in his mother's arms. Just then, the doorbell rang.
Oh, good Lord, they're here,
said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss. Piers Polkiss! I like that. Sorry, Lenny. Just then, the door... Oh, here we go. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. Okay. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. These are like such caricatures. They're almost like those kids from The Simpsons. At least in the early seasons when they beat the crap out of everybody. One person held Bart from behind. Like exactly like those kids. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside.
I'm warning you,
he said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's.
I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas.
I'm not going to do anything, said Harry. Honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald, except for his fringe, which he left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotape glasses. Next morning, however, he got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how his hair grew up so quickly. What? So he can't cut his hair, hey? Okay. We got a couple more pages. I'll finish off this chapter, everybody. Not sure the Dursleys are Cockney. They believe they're posh, but aren't really. Very suburban. Yeah, maybe. I enjoy them being Cockney. It's fun to read that way. And I'm guessing they're not in the majority of these books. That's what I'm guessing. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into the revolting old jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange baubles. The harder he tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet. but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual, when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress, telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings. But all he'd tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mrs. Figg's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning, it was motorbikes. "Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums," he said as a motorbike overtook them. "I had a dream about a motorbike," said Harry, remembering suddenly. "It was flying." Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a mustache. "Motorbikes don't fly!" Dudley and Piers sniggered. "I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in a way it shouldn't. No matter if it was in a dream or even a cartoon, they seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before he could hurry him away, they brought a cheap lemon ice lolly. It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched the gorilla scratching its head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Okay, everybody, my mouth is getting actually pretty tired. So I'm thinking, let's see. Yeah, I did like 50 minutes worth of reading there. I'm going to leave a little, I think I'm going to continue on tomorrow, but I want to leave a little time for feedback or questions, but you all already know this. You already know the books. You want me to keep going? No. I think I'm going to take a break. My mouth's killing me. All right. I will see all of you tomorrow then. Same time, and we're going to get through this whole book. Right now, we're in the middle of chapter 2, and maybe next time I'll go a bit further, but for today, that was that. Predictions. Predictions. Well, I have seen the movies, but I know he goes to Hogwarts. I know they run through a wall. I know, maybe these are the things that I remember. No, I'm not in a bath. I'm in my seat, and here's my dog, Dexter. So he goes to school, and he tries to learn spells and discovers things about Voldemort. That's what I can remember. Yeah. I'm going to read, Nora, I'm going to read at least the first book, and then we'll go from there. But for sure, the very first book. Yeah, they run through a wall. They take a shopping cart or something and run through a wall. Because I've seen the movies so long ago. I love the writing style. She's got a really cool writing style. A lot of alliteration, a lot of playing with words. The characters are pretty clear. At least these characters they seem pretty archetypal. You know? More Dexter, please. Here's Dexter. Hey, buddy. Maybe we will get through the series. Hey, buddy. Yeah. All right, buddies, friends, I will see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Same time, same place, a.k.a. Instagram. Stay safe out there. I say bye. Dexter says bye. Hey, buddy. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Okay, how do I save this? I just want to figure out... does anybody know how I can save this at all? Let's see. See you later.